Hello and welcome to The Search. I'm YHWH. In this lesson, we're going to examine Psalms 93 and 99, and the title of our study is Yahweh Reigns. Yahweh Reigns. After decades in exile, Psalm 92 testifies to the restoration of God's relationship with Israel. The people can now resume their Sabbath worship with great confidence that Yahweh is upright, He is my rock, and there is no wickedness in him. Psalm 92 and verse 15. What follows that psalm is one of the most interesting sub-collections of psalms within the Psalter, Psalms 93 through 99. Now, each of these psalms is anonymous. In fact, they have no superscript at all, with the exception of Psalm 98 that simply has the title, A Psalm. Moreover, they all express some variation of the same theme, which is Yahweh reigns. In spite of the fact that the reign of God is a prominent theme throughout the Psalter, the actual verb, to reign, only appears 6 times in the book of Psalms, and 4 of those 6 occurrences are right here in this collection. Let's see them. Psalm 93 and verse 1, Yahweh reigns, he is robed in majesty. Yahweh is robed in majesty and armed with strength. Indeed, the world is established firm and secure. Psalm 96 verse 10 says, Say among the nations, Yahweh reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Psalm 97 opens with these words, Yahweh reigns, let the earth be glad, let the distant shores rejoice. And finally, Psalm 99, Yahweh reigns, let the nations tremble. He sits enthroned between the cherubim, let the earth shake. Not only does Yahweh reign over the restored nation of Israel, but Psalms 93 through 99 assert God's rule over all, including creation and the Gentile nations. Now, Psalms 93 through 99 are a mixture of genre. There are psalms of praise, a royal psalm, coronation psalms, and there's evidence that these psalms not only fit together categorically, but that they've also been arranged in a kind of chiastic structure that might look something like this. Psalms 93 and 99 on the outer perimeter, which highlight God's reign. Then stepping into Psalms 94 and 98, we see God's reign continuing to be a theme there, but with specific overtones about God being the judge of all. Yahweh being the true creator of the world is the highlighted theme of Psalms 95 and 97 until we get to the heart of the collection, which is Psalm 96, where Yahweh is said to reign over all. So, for the purpose of this analysis, we're going to analyze these psalms based on their corresponding psalm, starting with this outside portion of the chiasm, and that's Psalms 93 and 99. Now, as we noted earlier, both of these psalms open with the formula of enthronement. Yahweh reigns, or other translations say, Yahweh is king. Psalm 93 is a brief yet majestic depiction of God taking his rightful place upon the throne. Psalm 99 also has Yahweh enthroned as he administers justice, speaks to his servants, and receives worship. Let's start with Psalm 93, verses 1 and 2. Yahweh reigns, he is robed in majesty. Yahweh is robed in majesty and armed with strength. Indeed, the world is established firm and secure. Your throne was established long ago. You are from all eternity. After the declaration of Yahweh's reign as king is sounded, a double proclamation is made regarding his royal apparel. He's robed in majesty. He's grand. Royal garments signify his status, and they're combined with some military armaments. He is armed with strength. Now, what occurs when Yahweh reigns as king? Well, it says here that the world holds together with stability. Verse 2 adds that Yahweh is not some newcomer, only having recently been enthroned, like the testimony of Moses in Psalm 90 and verse 2, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. Yahweh's rule is both ancient and eternal. Let's shift now to verses 3 through 5. The seas have lifted up Yahweh. The seas have lifted up their voice. The seas have lifted up their pounding waves, mightier than the thunders of the great waters, mightier than the breakers of the sea. Yahweh on high is mighty. Your statutes, Yahweh, stand firm. Holiness adorns your house for endless days. And we have this mention of water here in verses 3 and 4, and there's some uncertainty about what the water is meant to signify. Is this literal water that's being personified? Do the waters represent something like the forces of dark chaos, which is often depicted as the sea? Or maybe the tumult of the waters represents the roaring of the nations. In the end, it might not matter so much what the water is meant to represent, since, as Grant says, the meaning of the metaphor is clear. The sea is a mighty power, but Yahweh is more powerful. Whatever the sea is meant to represent here as some kind of uncontrollable force, Yahweh is even more powerful than the raging sea. Now, this short enthronement psalm ends as it began. Because Yahweh reigns, there is stability, especially in his decrees. Just as God is robed in majesty, so his house is adorned in holiness, that quality of God which sets him apart from that which is common. And finally, in the last line, Yahweh's eternality is confessed once more. You have to remember that during the exile, it would not have felt as though Yahweh was king. Defeat and despair had convinced the people of Israel that their God was defeated, and maybe he had abandoned them altogether, and maybe permanently, forever, forsaking the covenant he made even with King David. But now, the tide has shifted, and God's position on his throne is once again reaffirmed. The message of God's rule continues to dominate Psalms 94 through 98, but it's this last psalm in the sub-collection that parallels Psalm 93. So let's talk about Psalm 99, and we'll start by looking at the first few verses. Yahweh reigns, let the nations tremble. He sits enthroned between the cherubim, let the earth shake. Great is Yahweh in Zion. He is exalted over all the nations. Let them praise your great and awesome name. He is holy. Now, you can immediately, just reading these verses, hear resonance of some of the themes that we talked about back in Psalm 93. Both Psalms 93 and 99 claim that Yahweh is king. They both speak of his enthronement. They both refer to his holiness. And if the raging seas of Psalm 93 are meant to represent the nations, that's one possibility, as the nations roar and make tumult just like the seas, Yahweh is greater even than them. And if that's what the seas are meant to represent in Psalm 93, then we have something similar here, where God's power over the Gentiles is being emphasized. Let's continue now in verse 4. The king is mighty. He loves justice. You have established equity. In Jacob you have done what is just and right. Exalt Yahweh our God and worship at his footstool. He is holy. Now, we see here in Psalm 99 an expansion on something that was introduced back in Psalm 93 regarding God's kingship. Here, his reign is marked by a love for justice and the establishment of equity or fairness. And notice also that Psalm 99 has a special interest in how God has interacted with Israel. Yes, Yahweh is exalted over all the nations, but he is especially great in Zion, and he's executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Of course, whenever we see a reference to Jacob, we should think of it as another way of referring to Israel. Now, in response to Yahweh's just and righteous rule, in verse 5, the people are invited to exalt and worship him. As always, the English word worship is not very precise and only does a passable job communicating the meaning of the Hebrew word. The NLT does a better job with verse 5. It says, bow low before his feet, for he is holy. In Israelite worship, the entire body was engaged. All right, let's resume our reading now in verse 6. Moses and Aaron were among his priests. Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called on Yahweh, and he answered them. He spoke to them from the pillar of cloud. They kept his statutes and decrees he gave to them. Yahweh our God, you answered them. You were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. Exalt Yahweh our God and worship at his holy mountain, for Yahweh our God is holy. Now this is interesting. In an enthronement psalm that's all about Yahweh's rule, why are Moses, Aaron, and Samuel invoked? And also, why is Moses referred to here as a priest when he's not identified as such anywhere else in Scripture? Well, the point of this section is in verses 5 and 9, where Israel is summoned to exalt and bow down to their holy God. So this whole section here, the first section and the second section of the psalm, are bound up in this invitation to bow before God, to exalt him, to worship him at his holy feet. But a question may be lingering in the back of the mind of the psalmist, which is, how can we do that? How can a sinful people kiss the feet of a holy and reigning God? And I think verse 8 is meant to give the answer. You were to Israel a forgiving God, though you punished their misdeeds. So first, Israel's sins must be forgiven. Then, and only then, can the people come into God's presence for worship. But this begs another question, and that is, how can Israel's sins be forgiven? And the answer to that question brings us back to verses 6 and 7, the fact that Israel must call upon God just like Moses, Aaron, and Samuel did. Now, Aaron and Samuel were ordained priests, and even though Moses was not, in his work as an intercessor for the people, he often functioned very similarly. All three of these men petitioned God in prayer, and when they called on Yahweh, he answered. God spoke to these holy men through manifestations of his divine presence like the pillar of cloud. And also he revealed himself in Scripture in his statutes and his decrees, which are mentioned specifically in verse 7. So Psalm 99's message maybe can be condensed like this. This might be with my one paragraph summary. Yahweh rules over Israel and the nations. He is just, fair, and righteous. All are invited to bow down at his feet and exalt his name. But those who do so must be like Moses, Aaron, and Samuel. They must petition God for forgiveness and cling to his revelation. After all, Yahweh, our God, is holy, verse 9 says. Now, Psalm 99 really presents a very similar message to the call of the prophet Isaiah, recorded in Isaiah 6. Let's read that passage, beginning in verse 1. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw Yahweh, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 wings they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried. I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, Yahweh Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it, he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice of Yahweh saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. Now, let's notice the thematic overlaps between Psalm 99 and this passage from Isaiah 6. Obviously, we start right off with an easy one. Both depict Yahweh as an enthroned king. Both describe Yahweh's throne in connection to spiritual creatures. We've got cherubim mentioned in Psalm 99 and seraphim in Isaiah 6. Both mention the effects Yahweh's rule has on the earth. In Psalm 99 it says, Let the earth shake. And Isaiah says, The whole earth is full of his glory. Actually, that's what the seraphim say one to another. Both of these passages emphasize God's holiness with a threefold repetition. In Psalm 99, the author writes, He is holy, and Yahweh our God is holy, verses 3, 5, and 9. And of course, holy, holy, holy is Yahweh Almighty is the repeated chant of the seraphim in Isaiah 6 and verse 3. And finally, both of these passages acknowledge that without forgiveness and cleansing from God, it is impossible for humans to draw near to Yahweh in worship. While Psalm 99, like Isaiah 6, affirms the holiness of God and the need sinners have for forgiveness, there's also a certain kind of reassuring comfort that I think is provided in both of these texts. Now, one might conclude that drawing near to bow down before a holy God like Yahweh is impossible. Yet the record shows that Moses, Aaron, Samuel, and Isaiah were all able to do so. Now, these weren't superhumans. They were mere mortals who, by God's grace, received pardon and thus were able to worship. Moreover, while Moses was a great mediator for Israel, the book of Hebrews reminds us of the supremacy of Christ's mediatorial work. When Hebrews discusses approaching God's presence, it does not speak of the need for timidity and uncertainty, but of the privilege of boldness. In Hebrews 4, verses 14 through 16, we read, Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has ascended into heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way just as we are, yet he did not sin. Let us then approach God's throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. Notice that like Psalm 99 and Isaiah 6, God is depicted here as being enthroned. Confidence or boldness doesn't mean irreverence, but it does signify that the relationship Christians have with God through Christ is one of close intimacy. Confidence here signifies deliverance and freedom from fear. It's a life of prayer and worship that anticipates and even expects favor to help us in our time of need. Psalms 93 and 99 proclaim the reign of Yahweh. As king, his rule over Israel and the nations is absolute. He rules with justice, fairness, and righteousness. His throne is adorned with holiness. He is a forgiving God who makes it possible for his servants to come before him, to bow down to him, to exalt his name. Indeed, Yahweh reigns. Let the earth be glad. Let us rejoice. Come back next time as we continue to work our way through the Psalter together. Until then, God bless.